Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Boomer Time. As you know, this is the place where we aim to make complex issues involving aging, long-term planning, estate planning understandable. The whole objective is so that you can live more confidently, that you've protected yourself if you need help, and you've protected your loved ones and left a legacy that you're proud of, not a big fat mess, right? I'm your host, Nancy Kogar, and today we're diving into a topic that often, quite frankly, gets overlooked, but it is so very important. I know it's important to me. I'm going to ask you a question. What happens to your pet or your pets, if you've got multiple ones, if something were to happen to you? Do you have a plan in place? Have you thought about it? Have you talked to anyone about caring for them? How would we know that you had a pet? Right? These are all questions, that really need to be looked at. And I wanted to talk about this today. We love our pets. They're family, right? They're there when we need them. Sometimes we like them more than our family. They're always happy to see us when we come home. They comfort us. They make us laugh. They cuddle with us and fill our hearts with companionship. But, here's the truth. Many people, I think most people, don't plan for what happens to their pets if they can no longer care for them. I've seen it too many times in my practice. I want to share a tough example of what I'm talking about. So take Jim. Jim was a retired teacher, and he had a golden retriever named Buddy. He's about 10 years old. Jim assumed that, his brother would take Buddy. He likes dogs. If anything happened to Jim. But here's the problem. He never talked about it with his brother, and it wasn't in any of his estate planning documents. He didn't make any plan for it. Jim suffered a stroke and then was moved to a skilled nursing facility that didn't allow pets. Most of them don't. The family, was scrambling after the stroke to make sure he was cared for and protected. What about the dog, right? The family was left unprepared, overwhelmed, and no one could take care of Buddy. Poor Buddy ended up in a shelter, confused, grieving, scared, while the family was scrambling, trying to meet Jim's health crisis. Jim loved Buddy, but he didn't have a plan, and Buddy, quite frankly, paid the price. It could happen to any of us. Planning just, isn't about just big assets. It's about the loved ones who depend on you. And that includes your pets. All that means that you have to plan for the unexpected and the expected, right? Emergency planning for pets. So I think you should have an emergency plan and a long-term care plan and include that plan in your estate planning. And there is a specific way to do it and a specific way not to do it because you want it to work, right? Well, let's start with emergencies, okay? 911 things. You slip, you fall, you end up in the hospital, or you're stuck in rehab for a month. Who's taking care of little Trixie back home, the Bichon? Well, here are a few ideas that are simple you can do on your own. Tape a note on your refrigerator and inside your front door. Pets inside. Max the cat, Trixie the Shih Tzu, Buddy, remember Buddy? The food is in the pantry, litter box in the laundry room. Here's the vet's name, number. Maybe you've got a neighbor that can help, and that they're going to need that information. Go over and check on them, make sure they're fed the right way. Maybe they have medications that they need to take. How about putting it in your wallet? Carry a card that says, I have pets at home that need care if I'm hospitalized. Please call my friend, here's the neighbor again, at X phone number. That's a good way of having, if you're in an emergency room, say had an accident, something, that doctor can follow up, or whoever the care manager is can follow up and make sure that the neighbors have that information about the pets. Here's the other problem. You need emergency contacts that can access your house, right? You don't want just anybody having access to your house. I don't. But, give a trusted friend or a neighbor a spare key or just a way to access your house in an emergency like that. Let them know your pet's feeding schedule. They all are different, and any medications. I mentioned that before. Here's another example for you, okay? Talking about an accident, an unexpected accident. Martha slipped and fell, and she broke her hip. So she was in the hospital, and she left 2 cats at home. Okay, yeah, cats are more independent than dogs. But luckily, her neighbor had a key. When he found out Martha was in the hospital, he knew little Fluffy and Fluffyette were needing some help. So he came over to feed the cats and scooped the litter box while Martha was recovering. What a great way to avoid a health hazard and a emotional stress from Martha and the cats. It's not complex, people. This can be simple. Just keep your pets safe and reduce the stress on you potentially while you focus on getting better in that kind of situation. And I'm going to tell you, not planning for your pets can lead to all kinds of trouble, especially when it comes to long-term planning in your estate plan. I'm going to talk about that next. Hey, welcome back. So we talked about emergencies, just simple emergency planning. Now let's talk about long-term planning for your pets in your estate plan. Hey, like I said, they're important members of the family, right? So we talked about informal arrangements, and when it comes to estate planning, informal arrangements just don't work. And here's why. Don't assume your family member will take your pet. You know what assumptions do, right? Assumptions can also lead to heartbreak. Take Denise, okay? I know people that have birds, and parrots can live 60 plus years. That's a long commitment. Well, Denise had a parrot named Mango. It was about 20 years old. Could live another 40 years. That's a long time. So she should have had a long-term plan for Mango, but she assumed that her daughter would take Mango. But her daughter had young kids and was overwhelmed, not to mention the fact that her mom now needed some help with her care. Last thing she wanted was another issue with a parrot. So Mango, unfortunately, ended up with a distant cousin when that was not what Denise wanted. Should have had a plan in place. So the lesson here, talk to the person you think will take your pet. Simple, but overlooked. Confirm that they are willing and able to do so, and write down your wishes. It's the same thing I talk to people about when it comes to naming powers of attorney, executors, trustees. Talk to the people and make sure they know what you're asking them to do and that they will do it. Same thing with pets, right? So, what can you do? Can you leave a bequest to your pet in your last will and testament? No, but, you can't leave money directly to a pet. You can leave your pet to a person along with money to help with that care. So, in other words, I leave my dog Daisy to my neighbor Linda, along with $3,000 for Daisy's care. I got to say, though, that kind of inclusion comes with a caveat, because if you're leaving cash, that becomes the person's property. after you're dead. And, really, they're not legally required to spend it on your pet. If you trust the person, of course, that could work, but it's not foolproof. I have a better idea. And it's one my clients ask for more often than you think, and that's pet trusts. Talked about this before on the podcast, and you can go back and listen to that about pet trusts. And it's the right way to plan for your pets. And like I said, I got a lot of people that do it. So this can be made part of a trust, pet trust, right? Or it can be a testamentary trust. It can be part of your will. But that provision is made in trust. A pet trust is really the best way to ensure your pet's long-term care. You designate a caregiver for your pet, you allocate funds specifically for the pet's care, and you appoint a trustee to manage and distribute the funds, ensuring the caregiver uses them for the purpose that you have set out. Your care is outlined, includes dietary preferences, medical needs, even daily routines. I mentioned a story with a pet trust where there was litigation filed, and it was a little dachshund, and they wanted a specific amount of walking for the dachshund over a year. And there was money associated with that. So I'm telling you, people do this all the time. You don't have to make it complicated, but pet trusts are legally enforceable and will continue for the life of your pet. Harold, for example, had 3 small rescue dogs. He adored them. I know people like this, right? We set up a pet trust that designated a friend, Tom, as the caregiver, and then we set aside $15,000 in trust for the food, vet bills, grooming, caring, toys, things like that. And Harold's niece was the trustee to oversee the spending. So when Harold died, Tom received the dogs. He agreed to do that ahead of time, right? And the funds. And the trust ensured accountability, that the funds were being used as required, and quality of care for Harold's dogs. That's the way to do it, and we do it all the time. There are costs when you don't plan, and when people don't plan, pets can end up in shelters, and a lot of times if the dog's older or has issues, medical issues, it's just plain old unadoptable. Family members can fight or resent having to take in a pet. Yours truly, has inherited pets, although I really didn't want to. Thanks, Mom. So I know what this is all about. I got a dog that my mom was no longer able to care for. Her name is Sugar. She went back and forth from McCamey before she came into our lives. And she's sweet, but she's got issues. We always say, I don't know what happened to her, but luckily my other dogs are very, very low key and forgiving because she's out there. But I tell you that because I'm just telling you that not everybody is going to deal with your pet's idiosyncrasies, right? If they pee on the floor or they've got health risk or medical issues, you got to make sure that the person that's doing that has the resources available to continue the care and wants to or is willing to, right? You're going to lose control over your pet's future if you don't do that. This is all important stuff. It's simple, right? But important. So take this woman who passed away suddenly. She left behind 2 elderly cats. Family was busy sorting through her estate, and the cats were unfortunately sent to the local shelter. They were terrified, disoriented. One had cataracts and couldn't see very well, right? Due to that age and health condition, the cats were euthanized. And all of this could have been avoided with just a simple written plan. So how do you plan? I'll talk about that when we come back. Well, welcome back. Today we are talking about keeping your furry and fluffy family members taken care of in your estate plan. This is, I'm being a little light in saying that, but this is important stuff. I love my animals, and I'm absolutely going to make sure that they are taken care of. There's people I don't want them to be with, and I'm sure you've got some of those too. And I couldn't stand to think about them going to a shelter. So, this is how you can protect against that. So, we said, how do you plan? Well, that's important too, because if you've got a dog or a cat or you've got a bird, some people here, they've got horses, they've got chickens, they've got family members that have pigs, land. I've seen it all. So it takes planning, and it has to be specific to the animals that you have. Sometimes animals can be a big investment, especially horses, things like that, right? It's all part of your estate plan. So how do you plan to take care of your pet? If you're wondering what to do next, I'm going to offer you a quick checklist, and you can download the checklist right at my website for free, nancykogar.com. So make sure to go there. I think that will be a good resource for you as you flesh out some of these issues. And then when you're ready to do your estate plan, call me and we'll meet for a strategy session and we can work out the rest. So on that checklist, you want to identify who will care for your pet in an emergency, right? And then in the long term, if something happens to you, like I say with, estate planning, always have an alternate because something could happen to them too, right? But have that plan in place. Have a person, contact information, all of that available so that if something happens, we know how to get in touch with them. And I mentioned this before, common sense, but have a conversation with that person and confirm their willingness to act, to house the animal. Then leave written instructions for daily care of the animal, vet contacts, medical needs, food that they prefer. Not everybody wants to take in your pet if they've got idiosyncrasies like pooping and peeing and, things like that. Most people probably would not tolerate, but you can find the right person. You need to decide how much money you need to leave for that care. And, that needs to be included in an estate plan. So consider a pet trust for more structured planning. Because if you're just giving cash to somebody, there's no accountability. You want to be sure that it's used for the purpose that you intend it to be used for. Review your estate plan to ensure that your pet is included. Maybe you did something 5-10 years ago, didn't have the pet then, didn't have the animal then. You need to update your estate plan. And I can help you do that. What if you don't have anyone to help you with your pet? Well, I've got people like that too. You're older, you're the last one left. You've got your little poodle that's just such a precious little friend and comfort in your older years. That's wonderful. But you don't have anybody practical to take care of it if something happens to you. Plan now. There are local rescue groups that have lifetime care programs. There are adoption programs that they can rehouse older dogs that you can no longer care for, cats. There are even sanctuaries for pets, if you want to try that. I've seen sanctuaries even here in Tennessee for elephants. So they've got sanctuaries for everything, I'm telling you. Talk to your attorney. Find alternatives. Maybe there's a teenager in the neighborhood that can act as a paid caregiver within a pet trust. Even if you say, I can't afford to leave a lot of money, leave what you can, right? Even if it's a small amount to help with food, vet bills, rehousing, anything is always better than nothing, right? So, if you love your pet, Don't leave their future to chance. I know I couldn't stand to think about that. You have to plan, right? They deserve that. So take these steps, will you? Write down your wishes today. Talk with a family member or your chosen caregiver. Make sure they're willing to do it. And then schedule a time to review or update your estate plan to include your pet. You'll be glad you did, right? Your pets give you unconditional love. It's a planning, it's just a final gift to them, right? For all the love that they've given you. Just makes sense. Well, I want to say thank you for joining me on this episode of Boomer Time, and I'm so glad you're here and part of the Boomer Time community. If you're new, remember to like and subscribe so you will never miss a future episode. I also love resources, so I put those out there, and those are available for you too. You won't miss it. And if you like Boomer Time, share it with a friend. I'm trying to expand the community, so more help to more people. Remember, estate planning isn't about doom and gloom. And death and dying is part of it, yeah, but it's about protecting what you love. It's about protecting you in the future. It's about reducing stress for your family, for your loved ones. I can't tell you how many people have come to me after a family member left a big, complicated mess, and they say to me, I don't want to do that to my family members. If you've got questions about how to include your pet in your estate plan or want to explore setting up a pet trust, I'm here to help. I do them all the time. So you can find more resources on my website, or you can reach out to me and Dee Dee, my legal assistant, and schedule a strategy session, and we can sit down and chat. And like I said, if you found this episode helpful, share it with a fellow pet lover, right? And leave us a review to help others discover these important conversations. This is important stuff, right? So until next time, make sure to take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, and take care of those furry family members, right? Remember, it's never too early to plan, but sometimes it can be too late. I'll see you next time.